Hi, everybody. I landed this morning. I haven't slept in 24 hours, but I'm going to give it my best shot here. The music woke me up, that's for sure. Yeah, so I've actually, like Salim mentioned, I was a partner at Deloitte Consulting for a while, and actually, I implemented a lot of the stuff that you're hearing about today. So I worked with large organizations. Now I've switched careers and shifted mindsets to trying to solve some of the world's grandest challenges using some of the techniques that you've heard about today. So I'm pretty honored to be at the Xprize Foundation. It's a great nonprofit that's focused on creating incentive competitions to solve world's grandest challenges. I'm going to talk to you tonight about crowdsourcing, the on-demand economy, and the sharing economy. I will tell you that in the programs that I've done with Singularity University and Xprize is with corporations, CEOs of large corporations, and also the last few years at Deloitte, the one thing that I've seen companies move on the most is using the crowd. So out of a lot of things that you hear about today, something that is very actionable, something that you can actually start to deploy and you should start to focus on it, is how to use the crowd more in your organization. We'll talk about that today. A lot of the left-hand side of what you see up here has been discussed in the last 2 days. You heard talks on artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, biotech, networks and sensors, et cetera. What I'm going to focus is more on the right-hand side. Terms like crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, incentive competition, sharing economy, the maker movement, gamification, do-it-yourself economies, et cetera. The thing that I think is interesting is if you look at this list, these topics, 6, 7, 8 years ago, these weren't even management discussions along this vocabulary. And today, in the business world, you have CEOs and board of directors not just talking about this, but spending days talking about these topics. And that's pretty interesting to me. This is literally how quickly things are moving. A decade ago, these were terminology that weren't even used. Some people didn't even know what it meant. And now it's the common vernacular that's being used in boardrooms. To personalize this a little bit, I'm going to share with you a personal story. How many of you have kids that are high school or college age? Okay, so I have 2 kids, one that's in college and one that graduated from university about a year ago. This is her resume, Ariel. And it was interesting because when Ariel came to me as she was graduating from school, she studied environmental biology, studied in the Galapagos Islands her last year of school. She was a millennial that was entering the workforce right out of college. And for the first time, I think probably in history, rather than doing the typical route of looking for an employer, going for a job, going for interviews, and taking that career path, she asked me, Dad, there's other ways I can get employment, right? And I said, yeah, you should try doing something on the crowd. So she simply went on to Google and did a search for crowdsourcing environmental science, and sure enough, there were hundreds and legitimately dozens of opportunities where her skill set and her knowledge just out of school could be tapped into by someone else in the world, and she would get paid for it, specifically in her field. And if she wanted to flip that and actually get funding to do some research, she did a search on crowdfunding environmental science, and sure enough, she found hundreds and legitimately dozens of places where she could go, similar to Kickstarter, and specific to environmental science, get funding to do her research. And it was real. She actually found one student that was her age that had done just that. He was a 19-year-old that went on to a crowdfunding site, basically asked the world community to contribute to his research after he'd explained his grand challenge that he was going to focus on with oceans, and raised $2 million to do that research. And he's out there doing that today. So think about that. As millennials in the workforce start to experience what my daughter experienced, they're never going to go for the same type of employment role ever again. And she's doing that. She actually took a job at Xprize, coincidentally, so she's not doing the crowd anymore. But it was successful. She could go get work somewhere else in the world, someone looking for her skill set, or she could raise funding to do projects. And it's just the beginning. This is like the dot matrix version. And as employers of large companies, you should start to realize that. Millennials are going to start to realize, with everybody connected with supercomputers in their pockets, it's going to be very easy to connect supply and demand of labor, and that's what's happening with the crowd economy. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more here. There was a good article about a year ago in The Economist magazine. I'd suggest you read it if you want to get a good review of how the crowd, in the crowd economy, or workers on tap, is being leveraged. It's got a lot of good statistics in it. But the author got this right, which is, I anticipate within the next decade, the whole notion of an organization is going to dematerialize in terms of having functional departments. So why have a legal department? Why have an advertising group? Why have a logistics or operations if you can figure out ways to use the crowd to source those functions rather than having them in-house? It's very similar to what Slims have been talking about exponential organizations. If you want to scale rapidly, then you use the crowd, and many of your departments will go away, and there's examples of that happening today, especially in companies like consumer product companies, branded companies. You see their marketing and their advertising being outsourced. Instead of using advertising agencies, they're outsourcing that to some crowd plays. More successful than they would if they were to do it in-house, and I'll describe to you why that's the case. So it's a recent trend, and the reason it's a recent trend, if you look at it, it really makes sense. We have cloud computing. Everyone's walking around with a supercomputer in their pocket connected to everybody else. And then, as importantly, we have a culture of being more social and sharing more with others, even complete strangers. So the social economy, kids growing up on social networks, has got them used to collaborating more online. So my daughter would tell me, with her sorority, she was in a sorority that focused on social impact. They would organize events, they would organize activities, they would do fundraising, and they would do it all over the web. So she got used, her brain got used to and trained to do collaboration and connections without physically being with other people. Unlike me, where you kind of do it in teams and then you go work for a company. The first company I worked for was the Kellogg company, the cereal company, and I was in the marketing department. And I only knew how to get work done if I could see people and touch people and be around people, right? So that's just not how kids are getting wired. And so that's all changing the landscape of labor. So you have this on-demand crowdsource workforce. For the first time, you have millennials, particularly in the US. I don't know what the statistics are in Germany, but in the US, it's the largest portion of the workforce now is millennials. And millennials like flexible hours. They expect to be mobile. They identify as night owls. They like to freelance. They like to work multiple jobs at the same time. They like flexible hours, and they prefer to work online. That's just how they're being wired. And like I said, they're the largest portion of the workforce in many economies now. The other thing that's happening is you have this situation occurring where the delineation of current economics condition is creating an interesting scenario of needs. So think about it. You have one group of people that have too much money and not enough time, and you have another group of people that have not enough money and too much time. And essentially, they're figuring out how to get directly connected with each other. Okay? Good example of that would be, I would typically drive myself to work, but if I'm making a lot of money and I'm earning a lot of wealth, I'm going to Uber to work every day so I can work while I'm driving. And therefore, someone else who's got not enough money but too much time is going to become an Uber driver. And you can see that play out in multiple ways. So you can really see that happening. So what is industrialized crowdsourcing? This is the notion of getting access to anyone, literally anyone, we'll discuss this, anywhere in the world, at any time, and at scale. And that's the important word here is, if you're trying to create an exponential organization, especially with the technologies that you've heard of in the last couple days, if you want to have first mover advantage, you're going to start to explore with technologies that may have a short shelf life. It's kind of like the VHS or Betamax decision, right? Because it's the early stages of some of these technologies. So if you start to explore with them, if you try to hire in-house, you may have to be letting people go within 6-7 months because you have to be agile and adaptable. So how are you going to flex your staff up and down accordingly to these new technologies? How are you going to experiment and fail fast, fail cheap, and fail forward if you've got to hire employees and go through that whole process? And then if you decide you're not going to use this form of virtual or augmented reality, you're going to use a different form of virtual or augmented reality, you're going to lay off that technical aptitude that you've hired and trained, you're going to lay them off and hire a new group. It's just not going to happen. So the notion of using the crowd to get scale and expertise as you need it on demand is important. And the crowd's being used for very simple tasks to very complex tasks to very open-ended ones, and we'll discuss that. So here's the kicker. Most people think that the crowd model is like the JV team. It's the B team. It's not the A team. It's all the people that can't get jobs that are in the crowd. That's the first kind of inclination, is that that's what the crowd is all about. And that's exactly wrong. That's not what we see happening. And the reason is, how many people think here that the smartest people work for you in your company? Raise your hand if you think the smartest people work in your company. Very modest German group. There's one guy that's not so modest. So the reality is, the smartest people don't work for you, nor the most creative people. The smartest and most creative people don't work at Deloitte. Deloitte's got 250,000 people. They don't work at Xprize. Okay, maybe they work at Xprize. We got Peter D. Mandis, so come on. So the notion is, the smartest people in the world, the most creative people, they don't work for you. Where do they work? They work somewhere out there in the 8 billion, 7 to 8 billion people in the world. So if you start putting yourself in a smartness contest with everybody else in the world, you're going to lose. So if you have a competitor that starts to figure out how to crack the code on using the crowd, well, you use just those minds within your department or within your building, over time you will lose that race. Someone else, your competitor, is going to figure out how to get the wisdom of the world, the genius of the crowd, harnessed, and create a competitive advantage that becomes a disruptive advantage for them if they're competing against you, and you're using only the people within your groups or your departments or your agencies. So that's the first thing. The goal is, you have to figure out how to get the needle in the haystack to come to you. So sure, somewhere out of the 7+ billion people on the planet, there are smarter, more creative people than in my company. But why in the world would they want to do tasks or jobs or work for me? And that's the magic, is you have to figure out what is the incentive structure that will get someone in the crowd to do your work for you. And there's different ways to get that done. Because once you figure that out, you get that needle in the haystack incentivized to come to you, you get the advantage from that. So what are those incentives? An effective crowdsourcing model, if you were going to develop one, you have to really think through what's the incentive structure to get someone in that crowd to do that work for you and your company. Well, one way, obvious way, is you can pay them. You can pay them a lot. So you can make compensation. And you see a lot of crowdsourcing sites where you could do a task and you'll get paid for it, a micro task. You could do a research paper and you'll get paid for it. You could develop an app and you'll get paid for it, but you're working within the crowd. There's other examples too. There's convenience. So you could figure out a model where it's just so convenient that you don't have to pay anything, or you have to pay very little, but still get something done in a creative way. The example I'll give you there is this company called GigWalk. How many of you have heard of GigWalk? A few of you. So GigWalk is a model. They operate in a few countries now. I'm sure there's something similar here in Germany. But how many of you in your businesses have to know information about some particular space, some particular time cross-section with space? So some physical space out there where you need to know at an exact time something that's happening. It could be a restaurant you own and you want to see what's on the menu. It could be a bank that you own and you want to see if there's lines in the teller. It could be a supermarket and you want to see if your product's on display or if it's priced right. How many of you have a business? It could be a car dealership and you want to see if the dealership is set up right. How many of you have a business where you have physical things that are out there that you have to see and get access to information about what's happening? Quite a few businesses. So GigWalk, what they did was they said, well, there's people, everyday people walking around these places all the time. What if we give them an app that as they walk near a place that I need some information, it prompts them and says, oh, you just walked into a McDonald's and I need to know if there's lines in the drive-thru. Will you take a picture of the drive-thru and we'll give you $4 immediately. So that's what GigWalk did. You get a prompt. You'd be walking. My daughter used this when she was in college. She'd be going to the dry cleaners or the supermarket, and she'd walk in the supermarket and it would prompt her and say, we notice you're in the supermarket. If you go to the cereal aisle and take a picture of the Frosted Flakes box of Kellogg's, you'll get $8 for taking a photo, because the Kellogg company wants to know the price, or they want to make sure it's on display, or they want to make sure it's merchandised right. I did a test with PepsiCo and Safeway, which is a major retailer in the United States. We did 1,000 of these. The average time that we went in the computer and asked for some data somewhere in the United States to get that data back was 45 minutes. And we spent $8 on average. So we spent $8,000. Instant data. That's a disruptor. That puts IRI or Nielsen or some of these other players that sell that data for millions of dollars, puts them out of business. Many of you probably have sales organizations where you literally put handheld devices into the sales organization hand, spent millions of dollars of technology on consultants to configure that software, all so the salesperson could report what they're doing out in the field. This basically demonetized that whole model. It brought it basically to free. So it's convenient. You see, in that case, GigWalk does not pay you a lot. They're paying you $4, $5. It's cheap because it's convenient. You're there anyways. So convenience is one. Gamification is another. You can gamify things in a way that the people doing the task for you in the crowd are actually having fun. So they're doing it without being compensated. Good example of that was a researcher in the UK that had a very small budget, I think it was $20,000, to look at anomalies in cells of cancer. And she didn't have the staff to do it, and she only had $20,000. So what she did instead was, one of her staff members knew how to code apps, so he created a first-person shooter game that they put out on the web where citizen scientists around the world could go on and shoot the anomalies in the cells, but it was gamified. And so to them it was playing a game, but ultimately it was a way to statistically validate anomalies in these cells. And you can see that after 1 month, the gamers analyzed genetic material that it would take the scientists 6 months to do. 2 million images were processed, all through gamification. So that's another way to get the crowd to do something without paying them. Sometimes it's credibility and ego. So there's a lot of people out there in the world of 7 billion plus, and a lot of them have egos. They want credibility. They want to be recognized among their community and their peers. Good example of that is Kaggle. Kaggle is a data scientist community. There's several of these now. There's several types of models that use what Kaggle did, where Kaggle is a community of data scientists, hundreds of thousands of data scientists, that if you compete and win a competition, you get your mugshot, you get your face up on a leaderboard on their website. And they show the top 50 Kaggle competitors in the world. That community is so strong that if you end up being one of the top 50 competitors in Kaggle, you can get a job almost anywhere you want without even showing your resume. You just point someone to the website, and if you're one of the top Kaggle competitors, that means one of the best data scientists. So the credibility and ego to get up on that leaderboard is the motivation. So data scientists would solve data challenges for nominal fees. It wasn't about the money. It was because if they ultimately won, they would get recognized in their community. So it was about ego. Does that make sense? Another thing you can play on is passion and sense of community. So people being part of something significant. This is Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He's an Academy Award-winning actor. He was at one of our Singularity Deloitte Xprize events called the Innovation Partnership Programs. And he talked about he creates television shows using the crowd. And he's won Emmy Awards now for his production. So every week you can go watch on television a show that he put out to the creative community, tens of thousands of creative people, and basically orchestrated bits and pieces of creative content being organically made and stitched together into a series, and he's created television that way. And the people do it not because they get paid. I don't think they get paid anything, actually. They do it because, as you can see, they get recognized on a major TV show that won an Emmy. And now you have that on your resume as a creative person. So sometimes it's passion and sense of community. And lastly, competitive spirit. People like to compete, so a lot of crowdsourcing sites use competition. So those are the incentives. That's how to get one of those 7 billion plus people in the world, one of those needles in the haystack, to come to you to work on your challenges. I've worked with companies where we gamified cleaning up master data. They had how many have master data management problems with just messy data? You'd be surprised. You can intuitively think about a way to gamify it, to make it into a game, to just that community out there that likes to do crossword puzzles. It's the same appeal. Xprize is a good example of all of those incentives. It uses many of those. It has the monetary incentive, it has the passion, it has the sense of community. Xprize, if you're not familiar, it launches grand challenge prizes that create big social impacts, big innovation breakthroughs. The original Xprize, which Peter launched about a decade ago, was the Ansari Xprize. It was a $10 million prize for putting a spaceship up into orbit 100 kilometers and back down, and to do it twice in the matter of 2 weeks to show that it was reusable technology. It was a $10 million prize. Cumulatively, the dozens of teams that competed spent over $100 million to win the $10 million prize. And that's what Xprize does. They put out a prize, but they get the community to react, and it creates R&D, it creates innovation, it creates communities. and ultimately creates an economic spend to launch a new industry, and that's what it did. It created a $1 billion industry. Richard Branson was at the winning ceremony, and he basically took the intellectual property from the winning team to launch Virgin Galactic. A couple other prizes that are in the works that are pretty interesting, and it kind of ties into the themes of today, is Qualcomm is supporting the Tricorder Xprize. The Tricorder Xprize essentially is a handheld device, democratized down to a tablet, that can give you 54 health markers equivalent to a board of certified physicians in your hand, using artificial intelligence and peripheral devices that can do blood pricks and coughs and retina scans, et cetera, to determine your health. It's the democratization of healthcare. That prize has been running for about 5 years. It's down to 7 finalists. An award will be given next year for the finalist. Global Literacy Xprize is another one. That's the same concept. Elon Musk is one of the supporters of this prize. It's a $15 million prize. And it's, Elon Musk is on the board of trustees of Xprize. This is essentially a handheld device that will teach a group of illiterate children in sub-Saharan Africa, actually in Tanzania. We're taking 2,000 children that are illiterate. They're going to be given electrical power, Wi-Fi, and a tablet. And then the competing teams, the finalists, are going to put their AI software on these tablets, and whoever can educate the cohort of 100 villagers to a third-grade proficiency in reading, writing, and math wins the $15 million. That's that prize. This is all using crowdsourcing. It's crowdsourcing genius from around the world. So who are in the crowds? First of all, you have external crowds. You have consumers. They can be your consumers. They can be your community of interest, affinity groups. They can be the global population. Procter & Gamble, if you read about them, they do a lot of crowdsourcing using their consumers, or affinity groups like scientific communities. There's also internal crowds. How many of you have over 10,000 employees at your company? How many of you have over 50,000 employees at your company? A lot of you. So you have a great crowd. Using the crowd is a great way to absorb excess capacity. So when you have excess capacity in your organization, you can use the crowd as an incentive structure, and crowdsourcing is a way to capture that excess capacity. Keep in mind that these are one and the same. I guarantee if you've got 10,000 people in your organization, many of them, if they're not already, but particularly the millennials, are working for you by day and competing on the crowd by night and weekends. They're making money doing this. And the more money they make doing this, freelancing, flexible hours, working from home, the more they're going to realize that there's income to be made this way versus other methods like working for you. So it's something you should consider, and as an HR perspective, you should start to address it and discuss it with your employees, because it's happening. 48% bachelor degrees, 26% have master's degrees. The other thing we're realizing is some of the best people in the world, if you're the best in the world at a particular domain, you are working in the crowd, first and foremost. Why would that be? If I'm one of the best developers or programmers in the world, why would I go work in the crowd rather than working for Google or some other company that's going to pay me quite a bit? The reason is if I'm literally that good, if I just graduated from Stanford and I was the best programmer in my class, I know that I can go onto the crowd, onto the web, and I can just run the house on every competition and make 7 figures right out of school if I'm that good. And that's exactly what's happening. If you look at some of the top technology developer plays, like Topcoder, the head of Topcoder comes to our programs and he says, the ones that are making 7 figures are literally some of the best developers in the world. They just go there and it's printing money for them. So some of the best talent can be found in the crowd. Now here's the kicker. This is all happening right now. And today, I think someone probably shared a similar slide with you earlier, but today we have about 2.5 billion people on the planet that have connected to the internet. Within the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have 66% if we just keep with the normal curve. But the reality is, we've got Astro Teller from Google, from X, it's called X now, doing the Google Loon project, which is putting free Wi-Fi on the planet for everyone. They're doing it in Sri Lanka now for the whole country. You got Mark Zuckerberg working on the Facebook drone project. And the reality is, within 5 to 10 years, legitimately, we will see almost the entire planet, if not the entire planet, having access to the internet. And within 10 years, if you look at the exponential curve of computing power, every one of them will have a very low cost, but very, very high-powered computer in their pocket. Think about the world when 7 to 8 billion people are connected online, and think about how big the crowd gets. So if this model is already starting to gain traction, and it's a novel new model, and there's still cultural changes for people to start doing this. Once people get wired like this, especially people coming out of school and being trained like this is how they're going to work. This is the way the labor force is going to look. Getting access to work is going to be easy. And you should start to think about that within your organizations. It'll change the nature of your labor. So, crowdsourcing can be particularly powerful if you combine it with other innovation methods. For example, the sharing economy. How many of you have heard of the term sharing economy? So, we're comfortable sharing things with one another, even strangers. That's a lot because we're growing up on social networks. My daughter told me, Dad, I'm going to go to a concert. Where are you staying? I'm staying at Airbnb. Who is it? Well, I said, that's a stranger's house. You're not going to stay at a stranger's house before you go to a concert. She goes, no. Actually, I Googled the person, and they're like 3 people removed from you on LinkedIn. so you know them indirectly, Dad, so we're safe. So the sharing economy, crowdsourcing, and excess capacity. This is going to be really important what I share with you because this is probably your biggest blind spot, and hopefully I can break it down for you. I'll give you some popular models that are already disruptive. Think about excess capacity. For example, how many of you have a couch in your home that you don't use very often? A few of you. How many of you have a spare bedroom because the kids have left home or you just have an extra bedroom? Okay, a few more. How many of you have a car that you drive 1 hour out of 24 hours a day or something similar? Okay, you have excess capacity, right? Things that you're not using that are not at full capacity all the time. These have been disruptors. Excess capacity like this got put into the sharing economy, strangers sharing with strangers through social networking techniques, and user interfaces that put supply and demand together. And what do you have? You've got Uber, Airbnb, and the poor man's version of Airbnb, Couchsurfing.com. How many of you want to admit that you've Couchsurfing.com? Okay. So you see the model can be pretty disruptive when it's used and you have excess capacity. So Airbnb is a good example. Sleen referenced this a little bit, but Airbnb is an exponential organization. If you think about the model, when you find that excess capacity and you put it in the sharing economy and you use crowdsourcing to put supply and demand together, which is exactly what Airbnb did, it's disruptive. If you look at the leading hotel chain in the world, there's 93 years in business, 610,000 rooms across 3,800 hotels. A close second, 65 years. So half a decade, half a century to a century of being in business, 645,000 rooms rented. Airbnb, by the year 2012, surpassed both of them, and it had only been around for 4 years. And how many hotels did they have? They had 0. And as Sleen referenced, what was Airbnb's cost of supply? Essentially 0. And do you see Airbnb advertised very much? So their cost of demand is essentially 0. That's a pretty tough model when you can figure out how to use excess capacity, where you don't have to own the assets. You can share it among people that want to share it using crowdsourcing. Right now, Airbnb is $20 billion valuation as of March of last year. Other examples, parking lots. How many of you have a parking spot that you don't use, but it's in a prime space because you take off every day and you come back to it every night? I used to live in Chicago where I had parking spot, prime part of Chicago, but I would drive out of the city and come back. That parking spot, sure enough, excess capacity, and there's people that are figuring out models to take that excess capacity. This is one called Monkey Parking in San Francisco, where you literally pull up to parking spots and you say, I need a spot right now. It sends a message to everyone that's geographically located near you at that point in time that has a car nearby, and then I get a prompt if I'm in my office saying, if you want to give someone your spot right now for $10, accept it, go down and move your car, you'll get $10. So any type of excess capacity right now, I guarantee there's a startup somewhere in the world, Tel Aviv, Silicon Valley, Santiago, Chile, Brooklyn, New York, or in Berlin, some startup is thinking about how do I take excess capacity and turn it into this disruptive model. Another example is Waze. What's the excess capacity of Waze? It's the fact that you're driving, doing nothing, and you're generating data from your phone. That's just excess capacity. Brilliant. Uri Levine said, you know what? I think that's excess capacity that I can turn into and monetize. And he took that data and he created Waze from that. So lots of examples. So what you need to start thinking about is, are any of your products your consumer's excess capacity? How many of you sell a consumer product? Okay, so ask yourself, is any of your products your consumer's excess capacity? Example, we all have closets that have a lot of clothes in them, right? Excess capacity, don't wear all that clothes. Guaranteed, someone's going to think about a way to make it uber-friendly to where you can basically easily connect supply and demand and then Uber over clothes from your closet to someone that needs it, whether they want it for the evening or they want to lease it or they want to purchase it. That will happen. So if you're in the business of making clothes or selling clothes, that's going to happen. A lot of areas that have excess capacity. With Internet of Things, physical devices will have monitors on them, so you won't have to worry about someone leaving with your excess capacity and never coming back, right? So for example, if you have a lawnmower or a hammer or tools or things in your garage that you don't know why you bought them because you never use them, but you sell these or make these, it's going to become someone's excess capacity, and someone's going to figure out a way to share it. And you'll be, I like to say, Uber yourself, instead of disrupt yourself before you're disrupted, Uber yourself before you get Kodak'd, because that's what's going to happen here.
And can I get the volume? Unfortunately, we have no slack in the schedule.
There's no excess capacity left? I'm done?
Did everybody get that? No.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the time.
Thank you very much, Marcus.